Hi all! This video will demonstrate the features in the progression grid designed for practice with sequences. Sequence tools were one of the primary motivations for the creation of the progression grid, although you can certainly use the grid for general solfege and arpeggiation practice with Roman numerals. But let's take a look at the sequence-related tools. You may have noticed that we didn't discuss the Generate button in the progression grid intro video, which was unusual. That's because this button is specifically for generating sequential progressions. Clicking it will hide the grid, load a random sequence type in a random key, and play the progression. You can either click the hider or use the Hide/Unhide Grid button to reveal the grid, but you can also check to see what the sequence type was by clicking the box that hides this info. By default, the Generate button only chooses variants of the descending second or descending third sequences. If you want to include ascending second sequences, click the X to turn those on, but note that the only ascending second sequence type defined in the progression grid is the one with down a third, up a fourth root motion, in other words 1, 6, 2, 7, etc., which can appear either in root position or alternating with first inversion chords. But given that you can use the level 3 random phrase generator to practice sequence ID and dictation in the progression generator, the biggest sequence feature specific to the progression grid is the ability to load different sequences into the grid for solfege review and arpeggiation practice. Use the sequence type pop-up menu to choose a sequence. When we select one, it loads the appropriate chords into the grid. We can now play the full sequence or manually play or arpeggiate individual chords as explained in the progression grid intro video. The sequences loaded are mode-specific, meaning that if you change from a major key to minor and reload the sequence type, it will shift the solfege correspondingly. Along with arpeggiation, we can plan sequential improvisation by loading a sequence, studying the possible ways of connecting the chords, and improvising while playing the sequence back.
Me, do, re, me, fa, me, re, te, do, re, me, re, do, le, te, do, re, do, ti, sol, la, ti, do.
In addition to loading entire sequences, you can load the cliché lines that form sequences. For example, the do, do, ti, ti, la, la, sol, sol line that typifies a descending second sequence. Just use the pop-up menu and choose the line you want. The 4 numbers to the right of each sequence type are the first 4 scale degrees of the cliché line. So for instance, the 3, 4, 2, 3 line for a descending second sequence will appear in the grid as mi, fa, re, mi, etc. in major, but me, fa, re, me, etc. in minor. By the way, if you find that something in the progression grid is playing in a lower range than you'd prefer, like say if you want the sequence to play higher than the range you're improvising in, click the Loco button next to the Sound On toggle to switch to playing everything an octave higher. One last thing. The Level 3 module-specific phrase generator, which you can find in the other tools, was designed for sequence practice. Although this is primarily intended for harmonic dictation work in the progression generator, you might want to use this in the progression grid instead of the grid's built-in random sequence generator. That's because this pop-up tool lets you specify which sequence types to include in your practice, as well as how likely each is to appear. So I can choose, say, only the D2 and D3 sequences that don't use 7th chords to work on recognizing those. And I can still bounce over to the progression generator to play the sequence in 4-part harmony. That covers just about everything in the progression grid, so thanks for watching and happy practicing.